Former President Donald Trump says that efforts by the January 6th committee to get access to his White House records could permanently damage the presidency. Trump is appealing a lower court decision that the records should be turned over to the committee, which is investigating the January 6th insurrection. Oral arguments begin on Tuesday. Let's get some perspective on all this from CNN legal analyst Shan Wu. He's a defense attorney and a former federal prosecutor. Shan, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Good to see you.
So as you know, the Biden administration has refused to assert executive privilege over those Trump documents. And we've got the Trump lawyers now saying that this would damage the presidency. How strong is that argument from the Trump side?
I think that's a pretty weak argument. The problem for the Trump side is that their whole argument rests on the idea that a former president is able to have equal footing, if not greater footing, than the current president in deciding executive privilege issues. Now, that privilege is meant to protect the inner workings, confidences, giving good advice to a president. And unfortunately for Trump, the Supreme Court has already ruled in the Nixon cases that it's the current president that gets that deference. Now, it's rather ironic that the Trump folks are trying to argue that waiving the privilege in this instance, as the Biden administration is willing to do, is going to somehow upset the balance of power, is going to lead to maybe abuse of overly partisan politics, when really the very thing being investigated, the January 6th insurrection, is an example of using and abusing the power of the presidency to encourage an insurrection. So I think this is probably a losing argument. He hasn't articulated any personal harm. He's putting all the eggs in one basket of saying that he, as a former president, has a right to control executive privilege, and that's just not going to be right legally.
And because this will end up being a re-examination of executive privilege, what do you think the potential long-lasting effects could be on the privilege that we do give to presidents in this country?
I actually don't think there will be much long-lasting effect, and that's because this was an extraordinarily horrible event. It was really the first time in history we had literally an armed insurrection trying to stop the democratic process of our vote. I think the D.C. Circuit, as well as the Supreme Court, is going to see it that way, and that's all over the legal pleadings, that this was an extraordinary event, and it's something that has to be examined. I don't think it's going to be viewed as something which will become commonplace in the future, that every new administration is going to want to waive executive privilege so that partisan politics can go on. It was an extraordinarily terrible event, historically extraordinary, and I think the court's going to see it that way. So I don't think it'll have a long-term effect on the doctrine of executive privilege.
Let's talk about the documents that are actually in question. It is more than 700 pages that include White House logs and notes from his top advisor. Again, this is on and around January 6th. So what do you think the committee is targeting in those documents? What do they hope to learn?
I think they're looking to learn what it is that the president and his advisors knew, if they were involved in any actual planning or encouragement of the rioters and the insurrection, and there's nothing better to show that than the contemporaneous call logs, who's being spoken to, that can identify who else should be called before the committee. And really, if this was anything but such an unusual situation of the President of the United States and their advisors being involved in this, it would be a very straightforward criminal investigation, referral after Congress looks at it, to take a look who was involved in planning this violence, who was involved in trying to stop the election results from being implemented. But because it's such an unusual situation with the president and his advisors being involved, everyone's being cautious. Justice Department ultimately may be looking at this, but they're going to be very cautious. Congress is being careful in how it treats the witnesses and what it's asking for. And most importantly, the courts are going to be cautious. They're not going to just give someone a blank check to look at this. They're considering the executive privilege questions very carefully.
And of course, a reminder to our viewers that that a handful of top Trump officials have actually been subpoenaed by this committee, and it remains to be seen whether they will comply. Shan, we have less than a minute left, but the Trump side again has asked that these documents be reviewed page by page, which could take a very long time. Are they trying to run out the clock?
Oh, absolutely. They're trying to run out the clock. And they'll continue to do that. If they lose before this panel, they might ask for a full panel D.C. Circuit en banc, and then they'll probably ask for the Supreme Court to issue a stay so they can consider it. So they're absolutely trying to run out the clock.
And of course, if Republicans take power in the House next year, then this committee is essentially done for. Shan, we've got to leave it right there. Thank you so much for coming in this morning and offering us your expertise.
You're welcome.